Have you ever felt so small in the face of a gigantic challenge that seemed impossible to overcome? Imagine rebuilding an entire city in ruins, surrounded by enemies ready to attack at any moment. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? But that's exactly what Nehemiah did, and today I'm going to reveal the secrets he used to achieve the impossible. If you stay until the end of this video, you'll discover how to transform your life through Nehemiah's unwavering faith and inspiring leadership. Believe me, what you're going to hear here can completely change your perspective on the challenges you face. Interested? Then comment right now, "Lord, renew my strength as you renewed Nehemiah's." That's right, just type that phrase in the comments. When I see your comment, I'll give it a little heart, because I know God will bless your life today in a special way. Now that you've commented, let's dive into this incredible story. Nehemiah wasn't just another name in biblical history. He was an extraordinary man whose life teaches us powerful lessons to this day. Just imagine, an exiled Jew living in the opulence of the Persian court, but with a broken heart for the situation of his distant people. As the king's cupbearer, Nehemiah held a position of extreme trust. He was responsible for tasting the king's wine, ensuring it wasn't poisoned. This meant he had direct access to the most powerful monarch of the time. But Nehemiah didn't let this privileged position make him forget his roots. What makes Nehemiah so special is how he used his influence. Many in his place would have settled in, enjoying the comfort and security of the court. But not Nehemiah. He kept his heart connected to his people and to God, ready to act when the moment came. Nehemiah's story challenges us to think, are we using our position, whatever it may be, to make a difference? Or are we so comfortable that we've forgotten the greater purpose of our lives? Nehemiah was a man of prayer and action. He didn't just worry about problems, but was willing to be part of the solution. His courage in risking everything for a divine calling is inspiring and makes us question, how far would we go for what we believe in? Nehemiah's example shows us that God can use anyone, in any position, to accomplish his purposes. No matter where you are now, you can be an instrument in God's hands to transform realities. Nehemiah was a man of vision and compassion. His name means Jehovah comforts, and he truly became a comforter to his people. Born in exile, he had never seen Jerusalem with his own eyes, but he carried the city in his heart. Imagine growing up hearing stories about a promised land, a home you've never known, but that's part of who you are. That was Nehemiah. He could have been content with his comfortable life, but he chose to care about something greater than himself. What makes someone like Nehemiah stand out is his ability to deeply feel the pain of others. He wasn't just an efficient leader, but a man with a compassionate heart. When he heard about the situation in Jerusalem, he wept, fasted, and prayed. Being the king's cupbearer wasn't just any job. It was a position of extreme trust and responsibility. Nehemiah had to taste the wine before the king to ensure it wasn't poisoned, literally putting his life at risk for the monarch every day. This position gave Nehemiah direct access to King Artaxerxes, one of the most powerful men in the ancient world. Imagine the pressure of being constantly in the presence of royalty, where one misstep could cost you your life. But Nehemiah didn't let power and prestige corrupt him. He maintained his integrity and faith, using his position for the good of his people. This teaches us that no matter where we are, we can be light and make a difference. God's call often comes in the most unexpected moments. For Nehemiah, it came through devastating news about his homeland. Imagine the scene, Nehemiah, amidst the luxury of the Persian court, receiving information that would break his heart in half. The words of his brother Hanani echoed in his ears. Those who survived the exile and are back in the province are in great trouble and disgrace. The wall of Jerusalem is broken down, and its gates have been burned with fire. Nehemiah 1 verse 3. These words weren't just information, they were a call to action. Nehemiah felt the weight of responsibility fall on his shoulders. He could have ignored it, could have said it wasn't his problem. But something inside him broke. What would you do if you received such devastating news about something you love? Many of us would be paralyzed, not knowing how to act. But Nehemiah shows us a different path, the path of prayer and courageous action. Nehemiah didn't just hear the news, he took it seriously. He wept, fasted, and prayed for days. This teaches us that God's true call always begins with a broken heart in the face of need. Nehemiah's response to the divine call challenges us to look beyond our own comfortable lives. What situations around us are crying out for our attention and action? What walls need to be rebuilt in our families, communities, or nations? God's call is rarely convenient. Often, it takes us out of our comfort zone and leads us to places we never imagined. But, like Nehemiah, we can trust that if God calls us, He also empowers us. When Nehemiah heard about the situation in Jerusalem, it was as if an earthquake shook his soul. The fallen walls and burned gates weren't just structural problems. They were symbols of shame and vulnerability for God's people. Imagine a city without walls in those times. It was like a house without doors today. The inhabitants were exposed to attacks, theft, and constant danger. The glory of Jerusalem, the city of the great king, had turned into rubble and ashes. This news was more than sad information. It was a call to restoration. Nehemiah understood that rebuilding the walls was more than a construction project. It was a mission to restore the dignity and security of God's people. Nehemiah's immediate reaction to the news was to turn to God in prayer. His prayer, recorded in chapter 1 of the book of Nehemiah, is a model of how we should approach God in times of crisis. Nehemiah began by acknowledging God's greatness and faithfulness. He confessed the sins of his people, including himself in this confession. He didn't point fingers, but assumed collective responsibility. In his prayer, Nehemiah reminded God of his promises. He boldly asked for favor and success before the king. This prayer teaches us the importance of aligning our hearts with God's heart before we act. Nehemiah was about to do something that seemed crazy in the eyes of the world: ask the king of Persia for permission to rebuild a distant city. It was like asking a CEO to leave his position and go fix a failing branch on the other side of the world. The challenge before Nehemiah was monumental. Rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem wasn't just a construction project, it was an act of rebellion in the eyes of Israel's enemies. It was declaring that God's people would no longer be vulnerable and ashamed. But Nehemiah didn't let himself be intimidated by the size of the challenge. He knew he had something more powerful on his side: God's hand. His faith led him to take bold steps, trusting that God would open the necessary doors. How many times do we fail to act because the challenge seems too big? Nehemiah teaches us that with God, the impossible becomes possible. He didn't minimize the difficulty of the task, but he also didn't let it paralyze him. What makes Nehemiah's attitude so inspiring is his combination of faith and careful planning. He prayed fervently, but also prepared meticulously. This shows us that true faith is not passivity, but action grounded in trust in God. Facing the impossible requires courage, and Nehemiah had that in spades. He was willing to risk his comfortable position, his reputation, and even his life for something he deeply believed in. This challenges us to think: what are we willing to risk everything for? Nehemiah's story reminds us that God often calls us to tasks that are beyond our abilities. This is not to discourage us, but to make us totally dependent on Him. When we face our impossible walls, we can trust that the same God who empowered Nehemiah is with us. The decisive moment arrived. Nehemiah, with his heart racing, entered the presence of King Artaxerxes. The monarch noticed his sadness, something dangerous in the court, where showing negative emotions could be fatal. But Nehemiah saw in this a divine opportunity. With a courage that could only come from God, Nehemiah made his request. He not only asked for permission to go to Jerusalem, but also for letters of safe passage and materials for reconstruction. It was a bold request, almost unimaginable. What's surprising is the king's response. Not only did he grant Nehemiah's request, but he asked how long the journey would take. This shows how God can change the hearts of even the most powerful to fulfill His purposes. With the king's approval in hand, Nehemiah wasted no time. He meticulously prepared for the journey and the task ahead. This included securing supplies, organizing logistics, and gathering a team. Nehemiah teaches us the importance of careful planning. He not only trusted in God, but also used his intelligence and resources to prepare adequately. This shows that faith and planning go hand in hand. Nehemiah's preparation also included spiritual preparation. He knew that the battle he would face would not only be physical, but spiritual. His trust was in God, and he remained in constant prayer throughout the process. When Nehemiah arrived in Jerusalem, he didn't immediately announce his plans. Instead, he did something surprising. He spent 3 days observing, assessing the situation in silence. This shows us a crucial aspect of leadership, the importance of fully understanding the challenge before acting. Imagine Nehemiah, under the cover of night, inspecting the destroyed walls. Each fallen stone, each burned gate told a story of defeat and neglect. But where others saw only ruins, Nehemiah saw potential for restoration. Nehemiah's leadership stood out not only for his vision, but for his ability to inspire others. He didn't arrive as a dictator, imposing his will. Instead, he shared his vision in a way that lit a flame in the hearts of the people. "Come," he said, "let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." These simple words carried the power to transform a discouraged multitude into a united and motivated team. What makes Nehemiah's leadership so effective is his combination of compassion and determination. He deeply felt the pain of his people, but didn't allow that pain to paralyze them. Instead, he transformed it into fuel for action. Nehemiah didn't just give orders, he worked side by side with the people. This teaches us that true leaders don't just point the way, but walk alongside those they lead. His willingness to get his hands dirty inspired others to do the same. A notable aspect of Nehemiah's leadership was his ability to delegate and organize. He efficiently divided the work, assigning specific sections of the wall to different families and groups. This not only accelerated the work, but also gave each person a sense of ownership and responsibility. Nehemiah's night inspection of Jerusalem's walls is a leadership lesson in itself. He didn't rush into action based solely on others' reports. He wanted to see the situation with his own eyes. Imagine Nehemiah, by moonlight, silently riding along the destroyed walls. Each fallen stone, each burned gate told a story of defeat. But where others saw only ruins, Nehemiah saw possibilities. This careful assessment allowed Nehemiah to develop a realistic and comprehensive plan. He didn't underestimate the challenge, but he also didn't let it intimidate him. His approach teaches us the importance of facing reality head-on, no matter how painful it may be. Nehemiah's speech to the people is a masterful example of how to motivate others for a cause. He didn't minimize the challenge, but he also didn't present it as impossible. His words were a call to action. "Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem, and we will no longer be in disgrace." Nehemiah did something crucial. He connected the reconstruction project to a greater purpose. It wasn't just about erecting walls, it was about restoring the dignity and security of God's people. He helped people see beyond the immediate task to the deeper meaning of their actions. Furthermore, Nehemiah shared how God had already opened doors, mentioning the king's support. This showed the people that they weren't alone in this endeavor. God was clearly on their side. As soon as the reconstruction work began, Nehemiah and his people faced fierce opposition. Sanballat, Tobiah, and other leaders of neighboring nations didn't want to see Jerusalem restored. They used a variety of tactics to try to stop the work. The opposition began with mockery and ridicule. "What are these feeble Jews doing?" they mocked. But Nehemiah didn't let these words discourage the people. He reminded them that they were working for God, not to gain the approval of men. When mockery didn't work, the enemies moved on to threats of violence. They planned to attack Jerusalem and create confusion. But Nehemiah wasn't intimidated. He responded with a combination of fervent prayer and practical action. What can we learn from Nehemiah's response to opposition? First, he never lost focus on his mission. He didn't let himself be distracted by provocations or threats. Second, he trusted in God, but also took practical measures to protect the work and the workers. Nehemiah teaches us that opposition is often a sign that we're on the right path. When we do something significant for God, we can expect resistance. The question is not whether we will face opposition, but how we will react to it. Nehemiah's strategy for dealing with opposition was brilliant. He kept some people working while others stood guard. All workers kept their weapons nearby. This shows us that sometimes we need to build with one hand and hold the sword with the other. Nehemiah's enemies were cunning and persistent. They used a variety of tactics to try to stop the work. Ridicule. They tried to demoralize the people with mockery. Threats. They planned attacks to create fear and confusion. Demoralization. They tried to convince the people that the project was impossible. Conspiracy. They sought alliances with discontented Jews to create internal division. Intimidation. They sent threatening letters to Nehemiah. Betrayal. They hired false prophets to deceive Nehemiah. Each of these tactics aimed to undermine the people's confidence, unity, and determination. But Nehemiah was prepared for each of them. Nehemiah responded to opposition with wisdom and courage. His strategies included constant prayer. Nehemiah always sought God's guidance and protection. Vigilance. He established a system of guards day and night. Preparation. All workers were ready to fight if necessary. Unity. He kept the people united and focused on the goal. Discernment. Nehemiah saw through the enemy's traps and deceptions. Courage. He refused to hide or flee, even under threat of death. Nehemiah's leadership during this time of crisis was exemplary. He not only protected the work, but also kept morale high and progress constant. One of the most impressive aspects of Nehemiah's story is how he managed to unite the people around a common purpose. The reconstruction of Jerusalem's walls wasn't just a construction project. It was a community effort that required everyone's participation. Nehemiah understood that true strength comes not just from physical walls, but from the unity of the people. He created a sense of shared purpose that transcended individual differences. Nobles and craftsmen, priests and merchants, all had a role to play. This unity was tested not only by external opposition, but also by internal conflicts. When problems of economic inequality arose among the people, Nehemiah didn't ignore the situation. He faced the problem head-on, calling the nobles and officials to accountability. What can we learn from Nehemiah's approach to unity? First, that unity doesn't happen by chance. It needs to be intentionally cultivated. Second, that true unity doesn't ignore problems, but faces them with honesty and justice. Nehemiah shows us that effective leadership is not just about achieving goals, but about caring for people in the process. He didn't sacrifice the people's well-being in the name of project progress. Instead, he understood that caring for the people was essential to the success of the mission. The way Nehemiah organized the work is a study in efficiency and inclusion. He divided the wall into sections and assigned different families and groups to work on specific areas. This not only distributed the work effectively, but also created a sense of personal responsibility. Imagine the scene. Entire families working side by side, each taking care of their part of the wall, but all contributing to the greater goal. This approach not only accelerated the work, but also strengthened community bonds. Nehemiah also ensured that each person worked in an area that had personal meaning for them. For example, the priests rebuilt the area near the temple, while the merchants took care of the section near the sheep gate. This teaches us the importance of connecting people with a purpose that resonates with them personally. Even in the midst of an inspiring project, internal conflicts arose. Some poorer Jews were being exploited by their richer compatriots, forced to mortgage their lands and even sell their children as slaves to survive. Nehemiah's response to this crisis is a lesson in ethical leadership. He didn't hesitate to confront those responsible, calling a public assembly to address the problem. His indignation was palpable. "What you are doing is not right. Shouldn't you walk in the fear of our God?" Nehemiah didn't just point out the problem, but led by example. He renounced his rights as governor, refusing to burden the people with taxes. This demonstrates that true leaders are willing to sacrifice their own interests for the greater good. The resolution of this conflict further strengthened the unity of the people. It shows that facing internal problems fairly and decisively can actually strengthen a community rather than divide it. What happened in Jerusalem under Nehemiah's leadership was nothing short of miraculous. In just 52 days, the walls that had remained in ruins for decades were completely rebuilt. This extraordinary feat is a testimony to the power of faith, effective leadership, and the unity of the people. Imagine the scenario. A city in ruins for generations suddenly transformed into a secure fortress in less than 2 months. It was something so incredible that even Israel's enemies had to acknowledge that this could only have happened with God's help. What makes this achievement even more remarkable is that it was accomplished in the face of fierce and constant opposition. Nehemiah and his people didn't work under ideal conditions. They had to build with one hand and hold weapons with the other, always vigilant against attacks. This rapid reconstruction teaches us several powerful lessons. First, never underestimate what God can do through dedicated and united people. Second, with the right leadership and a clear purpose, it's possible to overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. The completion of the walls wasn't just an architectural victory, it was a spiritual statement. It was a visible testimony of God's faithfulness and the resilience of His people. The rebuilt walls were a symbol of restoration, not just physical, but also spiritual and emotional. The pace of reconstruction was frantic, but organized. Each family, each group had its part to do, and everyone worked with a sense of urgency and purpose. Nehemiah's leadership kept everyone focused and motivated, even when fatigue began to set in. The biblical text tells us that the wall was completed on the 25th of Elul, in 52 days, Nehemiah 6 verse 15. This incredible deadline is a testimony to the people's determination and God's blessing on the project. Think about it. What seemed an impossible task was completed in less than 2 months. This reminds us that with God, nothing is impossible. When we align ourselves with His purposes and work in unity, we can accomplish things that go beyond our natural abilities. The completion of the walls wasn't just the end of a construction project. It was the beginning of a spiritual renewal for the people of Jerusalem. Nehemiah understood that physical walls were important, but the true strength of a nation comes from its connection with God. After the reconstruction, there was a great celebration. The people gathered to hear the reading of God's law. Ezra, the scribe, read the law from dawn until noon, and the people listened attentively. This led to a time of confession, repentance, and renewal of the covenant with God. This celebration reminds us that our greatest victories should lead us back to God. Nehemiah didn't let the people boast of their achievements, but directed them to thank and honor God, the true source of their success. Nehemiah's story is full of lessons that transcend time and culture. His leadership, faith, and determination continue to inspire and instruct leaders and believers to this day. Let's explore some of these timeless lessons. Nehemiah teaches us about the importance of having a heart sensitive to the needs of others. He was in a comfortable position in the Persian court, but didn't hesitate to leave everything to help his people. This challenges us to look beyond our own circumstances and care about the struggles of others. Another crucial lesson is the combination of prayer and action. Nehemiah was a man of fervent prayer, but he didn't stop at prayer. He acted with courage and wisdom, trusting that God would guide his steps. This reminds us that true faith always leads to action. Nehemiah's story also highlights the importance of perseverance in the face of opposition. He faced mockery, threats, and betrayal, but never gave up on his mission. This encourages us to remain firm in our calling, even when we face difficulties. Nehemiah's faith wasn't just a passive belief, it was a driving force that propelled him to action. He deeply believed that God had called him to this task, and this conviction sustained him through all challenges. We see Nehemiah's faith in action when he prays before speaking to the king, when he encourages the people in the face of opposition, and when he trusts God for protection against enemies. His faith didn't blind him to real dangers, but gave him courage to face them. Nehemiah's example challenges us to live our faith in a practical and courageous way. He shows us that true faith doesn't isolate us from the world, but equips us to make a difference in it. How many times do we fail to act out of fear or doubt, when we should move forward in faith? Nehemiah's unwavering faith also manifested in his constant dependence on God. Throughout the book, we see Nehemiah praying short prayers in the midst of action and longer prayers of intercession. This reminds us that true strength comes from maintaining a constant connection with God. Nehemiah's leadership is a model for all times. He led not by power or position, but by example and service. Nehemiah didn't ask the people to do anything he wasn't willing to do himself. We see his servant leadership when he works alongside the people in rebuilding the walls. He didn't place himself above others, but was directly involved in the hard work. This inspired others to give their best. Nehemiah's determination was evident in his refusal to be distracted or discouraged. When his enemies tried to lure him away from the work with false meetings, he responded, "I am carrying on a great project and cannot go down. Why should the work stop while I leave it and go down to you?" Nehemiah 6 verse 3. This focused determination is a powerful lesson for leaders today. In a world full of distractions, the ability to remain focused on our mission is crucial. Nehemiah teaches us to say no to the good, so we can say yes to the best. Nehemiah's leadership was also characterized by his integrity. He didn't use his position for personal gain, but lived in an exemplary manner. This built trust among the people and inspired them to follow his example. Nehemiah's story is more than a historical account, it's a call to action for us today. Just as Nehemiah was called to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem, each of us is called to rebuild something in our lives, families, communities, or nations. What walls in your life need to be rebuilt? Perhaps they are broken relationships, abandoned dreams, or a faith that needs to be renewed. Nehemiah's story encourages us to face these challenges with faith, courage, and determination. Remember, just as Nehemiah wasn't alone in his mission, neither are you. God is with you, ready to provide the strength, wisdom, and resources necessary for the task ahead of you. The rebuilding of Jerusalem's walls took only 52 days, but it transformed the nation. Imagine what God can do through you in 52 days, if you fully commit to Him and the mission He has for you. May Nehemiah's story inspire you to be an agent of change in your world. May it encourage you to pray fervently, plan carefully, and act courageously. Remember, with God, the impossible becomes possible. And now, I want to leave a final challenge for you. In the next 52 days, choose a wall in your life to rebuild. It could be a habit you want to change, a relationship that needs to be restored, or a project you've been putting off. Commit to working on it daily, with the same determination and faith as Nehemiah. God's advice: "My son, my daughter, just as I was with Nehemiah, I am with you. Do not fear the challenges ahead of you, for I am greater than any obstacle. Trust in me with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. Acknowledge me in all your ways, and I will make your paths straight. Remember, I am the God who makes the impossible possible. With faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. Therefore, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for I, the Lord your God, am with you wherever you go." I will repeat this advice because it's crucial that you absorb it deeply. My son, my daughter, just as I was with Nehemiah, I am with you. Do not fear the challenges ahead of you, for I am greater than any obstacle. Trust in me with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. Acknowledge me in all your ways, and I will make your paths straight. Remember, I am the God who makes the impossible possible. With faith the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. Therefore, be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for I, the Lord your God, am with you wherever you go. Remember, on my YouTube channel, I focus on 3 things: educating, inspiring, and elevating other people to draw closer to Jesus, our Lord and Savior. Use my channel as a resource in your spiritual journey. And you who watched until the end, comment like this: "I stayed until the end." Just comment that. When I see that comment, I'll give it a little heart because I know I added value to you. And I'll be even more motivated to always bring content of the best quality. Now a powerful video is appearing on your screen that is a sequel to this one here. Filled with riches, secrets about God, biblical riches, and much more that will accelerate your results in all areas. Click on that video. Do it now.